Theme music. This thing needs some better theme music. Well, good afternoon, or whatever time it is when you're watching this. When I think of spiritual practice, I often think of something esoteric or mystical or extraordinary. But what if we were to acknowledge the seemingly more mundane spiritual practices of just being good human beings? Being a person who intentionally connects with a narrative larger than yourself, finds ways to be in more meaningful contact with people, and in this, the capacity to engage in life in a more balanced and peaceful way will just naturally come through. I'm discovering through this series of interviews that I've been doing here something far more practical inside of spiritual practice, more practical than I normally think about. In some ways, it's like finding a new way to look at the whole idea of spiritual practice and the question and the direction we ask the question at and how that matters. For example, people ask, well, what do you get out of prayer? And I'm always tempted to respond, well, I don't get anything out of prayer. I don't get more things from prayer. I let go of things like vengeance and hate and anxiety, and I let myself dwell more momentarily in the presence of love and peace and something more grand, some bigger vision or version or narrative, something larger. Perhaps that's what spiritual practice is. It's just taking the time to dwell, and maybe this, if you want to get something, maybe builds capacity. So maybe we don't need a rare metal bowl or a mountain or a forest, and it's good we don't need those things, because in Regina we'd be out of luck. There'd be no practice to do. But maybe with a little intention and understanding and imagination, the most normal of interactions can be seen to be spiritual practice. Today I'm bringing you a conversation I had with my good friend and colleague, Reverend Eric Parker, who will introduce himself in a moment. He is the pastor and also a blogger. He created a webpage, themillennialpastor.ca, with the tagline, "An iPhone Pastor for a Typewriter Church." Like many of the people I contacted for this series, his first response was, "I don't do any of those things." So today we're going to leave my magic whiteboard downstairs and broaden our scope of spiritual practice to include Dungeons and Dragons. My relationship with the game Dungeons and Dragons began in the late 80s and early 90s. The satanic panic and fear that something we're going to do or read or role play would somehow lead to evil had mostly receded. My youth group from church actually played this game together, and one friend was often saying, if you want to play a truly evil game, I recommend Monopoly, where the point is to hoard all of the resources and bankrupt all of your friends. I do think this is a strong argument. All of my Dungeons and Dragons adventures tended towards saving the village or the city or defeating an ancient evil in a cooperative imagination of sharing character abilities together. If you've never played, I would describe the experience as group storytelling. The Dungeon Master sets the stage and tells the players how everybody in the narrative world is reacting and responding. The players take on the role of warriors and clerics and wizards and thieves, using their wit and character traits to interact with this narrative world that the Dungeon Master is helping to create. And then you add in a bunch of rules and dice so that it's not just free imagination. There are guidelines that tell you what is possible within the world as you move along. I've included a few links below. So let's get to the inner capacity building that is the practice of playing Dungeons and Dragons. Fancy introduction. An afternoon, everybody, or whenever you choose to consume this pre-recorded chapel-type experience. I'm here with the Reverend Eric Parker from Winnipeg. Eric, where are you serving right now?
I serve Sherwood Park Lutheran Church here in Winnipeg. Yeah.
There we go.
Nothing fancy.
And I've known Eric for a long time, and we've gotten to know each other. We ended up in seminary quite a bit together, and but I did have a question I like to start the interviews with so that we can all get to know you a little bit. And the question is, what would 18-year-old you think about you today?
What would 18-year-old me think about me today?
Yeah.
Oh man, I hope that I would think that I was like cooler than I thought I would be 20 years after 20 years down the road. I think 18-year-old me would be probably pretty satisfied with where I've ended up. Uh, Probably maybe surprised about the lack of hair and the size of my beard, but and probably surprised that I'm living in Winnipeg and not Alberta. But otherwise, yeah, um, yeah, would be like both surprising and not surprising. I think for 18-year-old me to see 37-year-old me. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because you used to laugh about being part of the Lutheran pastor breeding program. What was it?
yeah, Lutheran pastors breeding program. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I sort of are, yeah, for sure at 18 already sort of had it in mind that this is where I would end up. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're doing this series with the chapel at Luther College about spiritual practices. And when we were chatting online, you had a rather unique spiritual practice. But before we get to that one, I wanted to just ask quickly with these COVID times, 6-7 weeks in now, I'm wondering what is new or different in the flow of being church for you and the practice of being pastor.
Yeah, so pretty much I've been working twice as hard with no actually meetings in the building. All of our programs are canceled, and I'm working twice as much as I was before. And I've sort of become like almost like a YouTuber, like a independent contract content producer. No, but actually, really, the thing that I've noticed is that a lot of my work was built around sort of focusing towards the Sunday event, for almost 11 years of ministry. And then when the pandemic came, there was a lot more opportunities for sort of more frequent contact. So pastoral letters, short little videos, devotionals, and I've added, we've continued the thing that we do in Lent, midweek Lenten Vespers. We've actually continued now through into the season of Easter. And so that's sort of an additional midweek practice that has been added. And it's a very different kind of service. It's whole evening prayer, but the devotions and the readings we do are very simple, very sort of pared back.
Mm-hmm.
And then in addition with doing online worship services. And so what I recognize is that I've always assumed that people didn't want too much faith in their lives. Sunday morning was enough, and then leave them alone for the most part the rest of the week. And actually, people, and it might be because they're stuck at home, it might be because of the pandemic, but people really do appreciate more frequent and regular contact. So every couple of days to have something that connects people to faith, I realized is something that I'm probably going to take out of this pandemic moment into the rest of my ministry.
Okay, yeah. So kind of yeah, more frequent other offerings.
Mm,
And I'm just going to loop that right into the idea that keeps coming up for me is this idea of creating capacity through spiritual practice. So it came out in the meditation, it came out in the creating beauty, and maybe we'll jump straight to something new for you. The pandemic has opened up a little more time, and rather than on the big whiteboard, we have journaling, poetry, meditation, creating beauty, delighting in nature, and I believe your response was, well, I don't do any of those things, but
no.
why don't you tell us about what's new for you in this pandemic that's creating space and capacity to feel normal?
Yeah, so it's sort of a weird one. It's actually Dungeons and Dragons has been the thing that I found in a weird way, and I haven't really found it newly. Sort of returned to it. Speaking of 18-year-old self, that was one of the things that I was doing a lot of back in high school and even into university with a group of friends is playing role playing. Staying up all night Saturday to be nerds and do D&D, and turns out that 20 years later, that's actually pretty cool, and D&D is sort of making a comeback. And it sort of ties into this other space I had in my life, which was my podcast listening life before the pandemic, which before focused a lot on hockey as a way to escape from sort of everything. Like, it's to think about, hockey stats and games in the season is a way to think about something that's not work related, that's not sort of everyday life related. It's sort of an escape. But as there's no professional sports and no new content coming out, I had to find something else to fill that podcast time. And I came across some D&D podcasts. And almost at the exact same time, my friends that I used to role play with decided to pick up and do some role playing. And they had started out in person, but within a couple of weeks, we all had to be on Zoom, even though they're all back in Edmonton and I'm here in Winnipeg. And so as I've been listening to the D&D podcast and playing D&D and needing that sort of space to give my mind a break from everything, whether it's from figuring out how I'm going to record and edit and what I'm going to say in my sermon and do all that stuff for video stuff, whether it's reading the news about COVID-19. There's no viruses in D&D. There's the and it sort of is a place, a story that I do want to hear. Like a lot of the TV and movies that is available out there seems disconnected from this world, in a way that it's not telling the story of pandemic. And so I'm not really, haven't really found that stuff super engaging. And yet D&D, is not connected to your personal world. And yet the themes and the stories of Dungeons and Dragons, that you tell in it, are, stories of good and evil, stories that sort of draw you into the larger images of life. Biblical themes often make it into Dungeons and Dragons, even, religious themes. And so both in the podcasts that I've been listening to, some of these questions come up, and particularly questions about what it means to be good, what it means to make the right choices, what it means to have faith even has been part of some of the podcasts that I listen to. And as well, playing D&D with other people is sort of that aspect of collaborative storytelling. So we're gathering together to do something, to tell the story that is not just mine, but something that we're telling all together. And so sort of sounds a little bit like faith. And it really, what I find, it's this thing that I get to do that sort of gives hope, that takes my mind off of sort of the everyday worries, and draws me into this narrative, this story that's much larger than myself. And so the collaborative storytelling has been really life-giving for me, to sort of be with people in a way that we're not sort of just unpacking what the latest sort of D&D round or sort of COVID-19 ramifications for life are going to be, but rather we're engaging in this cool storytelling. So yeah, it's the collaborative storytelling. It's the story that is sort of this thing that contains themes and connections to our world and our lives, but is something that's completely outside of this particular stressful moment.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking there and talking about larger themes and exploring ideas, and I'm just like, are you talking about poetry, or are you talking about D&D here? Like, it starts to sound like sort of going to a bit of the same space. And you spoke of turning your brain off, away from the things. A class I took right when the COVID dropped, I took a little course really quickly from the University of Toronto that spoke of when you bring your focus to something, it actually pushes out all the other thoughts, because we don't actually multitask as human beings. We're sort of, we can do one thing at a time. So if you're getting immersed in a story and you're getting immersed in themes and ideas, and you didn't say it, but I think I caught a sense of like, and a connectedness to other people, using sort of the medium of virtual space to actually feel like you're connected, right, for a time. So it's yeah. And and so as you did say though that it kind of frees you up, and then you go back to the tasks sort of refreshed and ready to do it. So it's yeah. Well, that is a unique take on this, and I thank you very much. On a Monday, we're recording an interview with the pastor. If you don't know, pastors normally take Monday completely off, and so this was very generous of you to give us your time here. And yeah, well, thank you very much, Reverend Eric Parker from Winnipeg, for sharing your time and yourself with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun to be on.
All right. And then I'll introduce some video magic, and it'll fade away as if I was an expert at these things.
Cool.
Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week at around the same time. Blessings on your day.